Hello, everybody. It is so wonderful to be here with you, to be in community and to share a project that's really near and dear to our hearts. My name is Dr. Tracy Flores, and I am an associate professor of language and literacy studies at the University of Texas at Austin and a former K-6 teacher in Phoenix, Arizona.
Buenas noches, good evening. It's so wonderful to be here with you. I am the co-author with Tracy Flores on a book that we want to share with you today. I'm a professor at the University of Texas at Austin as well in the bilingual bicultural education program area. And I'm excited to share the project that we've been working on.
Yes, thank you so much for joining us this evening. And let's just go ahead and get going so that we can unveil this book project to you. And the name of our session is Cultivating Young Multilingual Writers. And that is also the name of our book that we are going to share and invite you to sit alongside us this evening and learn about and learn from the teachers of this book. And so to get us started and to think about the work that we do as teachers of young writers and the work that we do in our classrooms, we wanted to bring in the voice of one of our young writers that we are so privileged to have learned from, and her teacher, Miss Bautista, who we're going to talk about in a little bit. And this was written by Virginia, and she is, at the time of this, a fourth grade writer in Central Texas in a dual language classroom. And this is writing that she composed as part of a project on social justice, where students wrote about identity, culture, language, issues that mattered to them, that were near and dear to their hearts, their communities, and their families. And she writes, "My Mexican culture. I've lived in America my whole life, but still embrace some of my Mexican culture, like my language, which is something that is very important to me. Somehow it makes me feel special because when I think of my family, I think of Mexico or even the language Spanish, and that is why Mexico and the language Spanish are special to me. Spanish reminds me of my family and culture, which makes me feel strong and powerful. Something else that reminds me of my Mexican culture is food. Some types of food that remind me of my family and my culture are quesadillas, tamales, and barbacoa. The real reason these foods are special to me is that I get to share them with my family. They remind me of a part of my culture that I don't show very much." And then she continues. "Another thing that I love about my Mexican culture is the stories that my family tells me. My whole mom's side of the family is Mexican, so they tell me stories about their childhood and how they grew up so much differently than me. The stories are always so amazing. They are like windows that let me see into their life and how interesting it is. I wrote this piece because I believe it's my duty as a Mexican American to change people's minds about Mexicans and stereotypes people say about them, because I believe that everyone is equal and everyone should be treated with respect. So in Virginia's words, we see how she feels about her culture, the strength and the power that comes from being American and Mexican, embracing her language, her food, and the stories of her family, and how she can learn, and it's a window into who they are and where they came from. And her words also celebrate the beauty of her heritage and her deep connection to her family and to stories. And she wants to use her writing, and she is using her writing and her voice to speak truth and try to change people's minds about Mexicans and Mexican Americans, because she believes everyone should be treated equally. So we wanted to bring you in to our conversation today, starting with Virginia's words as she writes about her culture, her Mexican culture. And this story, this writing, is part of the book that will be coming out very shortly, Cultivating Young Multilingual Writers, Nurturing Voices and Stories in and Beyond the Classroom Walls. And it's through the NCTE Publishing Principles of Practice imprint. And it takes theory and practices and puts them together and highlights teachers doing amazing work alongside their students.
So this particular book that we're sharing with you today is based on a position statement about the professional knowledge for the teaching of writing that can be used by teachers. NCTE provides many position statements with experts that volunteer from the membership to put forward so that teachers will have a way of becoming aware of the challenges, the latest thinking, the research, so that best practices can be shared, guidance can be shared, how to move and navigate through challenges, and the expert voice of teachers like them. So if you haven't visited the position statements, be sure to do so, because it really has dramatic changes that are refined all the time, so that writing is not the traditional writing that I learned in school only, but it's also movie making, it's media, it's three-dimensional art, if you will. So the idea of the position statement, particularly the professional knowledge for the teaching of writing, is to invite students to become authors, mindful of their purpose for their writing, the audience for their writing, and the conventions of the genre, so that they will have many resources to rely on, depending on what they want to communicate to themselves, to their families, to their communities, and to the world. In sum, the message we want to get across from the professional knowledge of teaching statement, from the best practices that are in the book, are summed up in the next slide, which is everyone has the capacity to write. Writing can be taught, and teachers can help students become better writers. Tracy and I do this not only for students, but we also do this at the university with pre-service teachers who want to also know about the best practices for teaching students, inviting them to become authors in their own lives.
And as we invite you into this conversation, one of the biggest things that we're asking you to also do is to reflect on how you come to this work as teachers of young writers, how you think about writing, how you were taught writing, and what writing is for you, and what writing can be for our young people. And so we wanted to bring in our stories as well, because this book is very personal to us. It is really rooted in our beliefs that all children come to us as writers, that all children and everyone has an important story to tell, an important voice, and that through stories and through storytelling and writing, we can really, speak our truth, we can heal, we can advocate, we can do so many things. And so for me, I come to this work as a a former classroom teacher, K6 in Phoenix, Arizona. And I really, really worked hard every single day to ensure that my students who were in an ELD classroom, English language development, had the time and consistent time and consistent space every single day to write their personal stories, to write for authentic purposes, to write for audiences beyond myself. And it was a challenge sometimes because of, time, policies, mandates that were outside, but I really tried to, within my classroom walls, make it that space where they knew that their voices and stories mattered. And so I have an example right here from my classroom when I was a third and fourth grade ELD teacher in Arizona, and how she wrote about her birthday party and how she felt so special on that day because she was surrounded by her family and her community. And this young writer came to me feeling like a writer, and together I supported her in amplifying her stories and her voices. And she wrote volumes every single day because she felt safe. She felt like her voice mattered. And she had that time every single day with feedback. And then the work that I worked so hard to do in my classroom to ensure that my students' voices and stories and cultures and identities were centered in our writing work has I've carried with me to the work I do at UT Austin. It is infused into my teacher education courses, where I work to build spaces in my teacher preparation courses and my methods courses for students to write from their hearts, to write in ways maybe they have never been invited to before, and to speak their truth, and to see the many ways that we come to writing and how they can grow as writers with time, space, and a nurturing, loving teacher. And then that feeds into the work that I do alongside young Latina girls in Somos Escritoras, which is a space that I founded for my dissertation work that invites Latina adolescent girls in 6th through 12th grade to join in community and use writing and art and theater as a tool of reflection and examination. And we really push them to continue to develop as writers, but also support them in amplifying their voices and stories, and see the power of in their words and in their stories. And all of this is how I come to this work. And you'll also see this threaded in the stories of every single teacher that's in this book.
So I come to writing and loving writing when I did the National Writing Project, specifically the South Coast Writing Project at the University of California, Santa Barbara. So it's been classes that I get to teach in literature, in writing, in language arts. And I love what I do. And I want to pass that love on to those who follow me, the teachers who want to be teachers, even in the most of challenging times. I'm interested in different varieties of Spanishes and different varieties of Englishes, because I think everyone has the right to use all their linguistic resources for any writing that they do. So with that premise in mind, these are just examples of the pre-service teachers that I work with will become bilingual teachers, typically in dual language classrooms. And I introduce them to books that they didn't know existed, books that have authentic representations of their realities, and about realities that sometimes were not invited into the classrooms that they assisted in K-12 education. So when I introduce them, just have the chart paper in the classroom and the question, ¿qué libro o lectura ha tenido el mayor impacto y cómo lo usarás en tu clase? So what book really makes an impact to you now, and how would you use it in the classroom? And mind you, I teach Latino children's literature early in the pre-service experience, when teachers are just getting used to using more Spanish in their lives, reading more Spanish in their lives. And so we purposefully use Spanish because that is what they feel they need proficiency on, not just content and standards, but to improve their heritage language skills. So in this particular question, one student wrote on chart paper, Soñadores, a book that is by Yuyi Morales, who happens to be one of my favorite authors as well. And when she wrote it, she put, me encantó porque representa a la comunidad inmigrante y lo usaría para una lección en mi clase sobre diferentes comunidades. So she would use this book because it represents the immigrant community. And she would use it in order to introduce the class to many communities, to other communities. But that's usually not the central example. So centering the community of immigrants, which is very important in the state of Texas, is already something that she's learned early in her career. The picture that I have there, the photo, is something I collected a while back when I first came to Texas, because I lived in rural, I didn't live in a rural area of Texas. I lived in San Antonio, a thriving urban community, and now I live in Austin, a thriving urban community. So I wanted to learn more about kids that came from rural Texas, and was lucky enough to have a doctoral student who introduced me to a small place called Encinal. And Encinal has about 500 people. It's about half an hour from the border with Mexico. And the school only had 99 kids. And these are some of the youngest kids in the school. And the first time we went, we wanted to know more about the kids in their community. And they were all born in Encinal. So I asked them, do you know what the word Encinal means? And they really didn't know. And so we looked it up. An oak tree that is outside in their community, a particular type of oak, is called an encino, and more than one is an encinal. And they're like, I mean, they were amazed. And that encinal is a Spanish word. They didn't know that. And it was beautiful, because then how do we take this to the next level, to write about it, to include their learning about their community, the naming of their community. So we went to math, actually, because they noticed that there's a big encino, and there's a little encino. And we learned to make a grove. So in the grove, what do you see? So they had, big, little, or big, little, little. And so we looked at the patterns. They put the patterns on paper. They wrote the singular encino. They wrote the encinal, meaning the grove, and they were proud of their writing. That was a beautiful moment. We kept going for the rest of the school year to learn more about encinal, but that's the story I wanted to share with you today. So now we're going to move into something you can do with the book, should you have the book, order the book for yourselves or for your colleagues. And that is that there's questions at the end of each chapter. And at the end of chapter 1, we have these are 2 of the questions that are there for you to consider. And we wondered if today, at this particular time, you would think about and write about what experiences do students need to see themselves as writers? And how do you provide these experiences? And if you would like to share your response with us, we would love for you to put it in the chat, and then it will be pulled so we can actually see your response and think with you about experiences where kids can see themselves as writers. So we'll take about, how long, Tracy, to?
Like 30 seconds, 30 to 45 seconds.
Okay.
And we hope that you'll share with us, because we really know that you're doing some amazing work with your students in very different contexts across the country. And we want this to be a generative space where we can learn from each other. I love that story that you told, Maria.
Thank you. I do too.
about the trees, for sure. So I think that we can move forward, and what we can do though is we can continue to monitor the chat, and we hope that we will hear from you throughout our conversation today. And so we wanted to talk about the teachers who are part of this book. We have portraits of 6 teachers who are exemplary teachers of young writers, who come to themselves as writers, who come to this work as writers, who see the potential in all of their students, the assets, the resources from their homes, communities, all the knowledge that resides in the students. And we have 6 teachers that are part of the book, and they have opened their classroom doors to us and their practices and their hearts. And 5 of the teachers are located in Central Texas and around Texas. And one of the teachers is located in Arizona. And they range in grade levels from 1st grade all the way to 5th grade. And they teach in dual language and bilingual settings, and English, ELD, English language development settings, or ESL settings, English as a second language settings. And I'm using the labels that the school system uses so that we can have a shared understanding of what we're talking about when we're talking about the practices that are occurring in these classrooms. And we want to share a little bit about each teacher in the next few slides. And so Miss Ortiz, she is, at the time of when we were writing this book, and now she's back in the classroom as well, teaches 2nd grade in a bilingual classroom in Central Texas. She grew up as the Mexican-American child of migrant workers in the Frontera. And she grew up learning English and Spanish side by side. And she invites students to use all their linguistic resources to make meaning of their world, to make meaning of content, to make meaning of their lives. And then Miss Carrie Alexander, she taught 4th grade language arts and reading in Central Texas. She is a consultant for the Heart of Texas Writing Project. Maria mentioned that earlier, that she was part of that, and I am as well. And she has developed a self-produced podcast series called Coaching with Carrie, focusing on community teacher voices and stories. So at the time of this, when we first started writing this book, she was a 4th grade teacher, and now she's at the university pursuing her doctoral degree in language and literacy studies.
So then we also have Mrs. Sandra Springer. She's a native of El Salvador. She's a veterana. She's been teaching a long time. She's been honored as the Texas Bilingual Teacher of the Year. And at the time of the study, she was teaching 3rd grade, but she has taught the grades all the way up through middle school. Like Miss Ortiz, she intentionally cultivates what we call a translanguaging stance for writing instruction. And that means that she allows the students to use whatever linguistic resource they need in order to write. It isn't separated. This is Spanish writing. This is English writing. Miss Soledad Bautista teaches writing using a writer's workshop approach. And she believes wholeheartedly that multilingualism and multiculturalism are perhaps, according to her, one of the strongest hopes we have to write a different history. So we're very excited to share these teachers with you. But it looks like we have some responses from the Quick Write in the chat. So we maybe should drop one of those in now.
So Lisa says, students need opportunities to share their writing for authentic feedback, to see themselves as writers. Absolutely. And the teachers that we're going to be talking more about in their classrooms really provide minute-to-minute feedback to their students to help them grow and become confident writers. Thank you, Lisa.
Is there another? Oh, we'll drop it later?
Yeah, I think that sounds good.
So we'll continue then with the last 2 teachers of the 6 portraits that we have in the book, and that is Miss Cristina Bustos. She's also a veterana and taught several grades, and also in different cities, Phoenix, Tempe, and Mesa, Arizona. And for NTTE, she has specifically created principles for teachers to create multimodal text sets, which are so useful in any classroom. She does explore culturally relevant literature connected to the lives of kids in Arizona in order to inspire their personal writing. Miss Carmela Valdez is in Central Texas. She was awarded the NCTE Donald H. Graves Award for Excellence in the Teaching of Writing. She's very passionate. She's an advocate for the rights of every multilingual student and believes that language is a civil right that must be respected in the classroom. So again, we have, I think these are the 6 teachers,
Yeah.
to give more context as to who they are and where they are. Do we want to drop another comment?
Sure.
Students need opportunities to not only write words, but be able to use multiple forms of art, like drawing, for example, to communicate various ways that they celebrate their culture and share stories. Emily could not agree with you more. It's a wonderful, for me, it's wonderful to keep through all the grades. We don't do enough of it at middle
I
school.
agree.
And then you want to be a teacher, and then it's like, oh, I can't draw.
Yeah.
And yet that is such a beautiful expression. And kids need you to do that to validate that that is a form that they love to use as well. So you stated beautifully a practice that we both would condone.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And like Maria said, we see a lot of it in the early grades when students are, putting pen to paper for the first times. And then as they get older, it kind of goes away. And I'm always advocating for that's a good entry point into writing. And it is storytelling and it is sharing, what's inside your hearts. And thank you so much for sharing. And so we're going to continue giving some more insight into who these teachers are. And we knew some of them before we started writing the book, but then as we started writing the book, we got to know other teachers who became part of the project. And so we're going to go through the different chapters of the book. And in each chapter, there are 2 teachers highlighted, and we paired them up kind of looking at their practices and also somewhat a little bit of their context as well. And in one of the chapters of the book, in the second chapter of the book, we focus a lot on designing a writing community, the time, space, and the material culture of the classroom. And so in this chapter, Miss Carrie Alexander from Central Texas and Miss Christina Bustos from Arizona, they are the 2 focal teachers of this chapter. There are 2 portraits of their classroom practice. And we really highlight in this chapter the ways that they draw on the work of Ralph Fletcher and Joanne Portalupe and give students time and space every single day for writing. And it's, they try to do the same time every single day so students know when writing is going to happen. And there are very intentional rituals and routines around writing and coming together as writers and living writerly lives. And within their classrooms, they use a diverse range of literature as mentor text, multimodal text, digital text, podcast, all sorts of different kinds of text to invite their students into writing. And these mentor texts, as Dorfman and Capelli remind us, these mentor texts are the literature that we can return to again and again as we help our young writers learn how to do what they may not just be able to do on their own. So it gives them a little push and helps them to see the possibilities in their own writing. And these teachers pick them for very many different reasons, looking at the languaging practices in the books, looking at structure, voice, genre, and also that risk-taking, how they can try new things that they hadn't tried before by emulating the works of their favorite writers. And then they also have tools readily available in their classrooms for students to live writerly lives. Books surrounding them, anchor charts, documenting the learning, documenting the ways that writers get ideas, what to do when I'm stuck, how to edit, revise, all of what they need is around them, pencils, paper, all of that so that the writer can get what they need in that moment. And then the classrooms, they really view their classrooms as a living room, a space where we come together and we share in community. we share food, we share story, we share our lives. And so you'll see rugs, you'll see them, you'll see in their classrooms the furniture intentionally placed around to open space for that dialogue, for those academic conversations, as well as that storytelling to happen as well. And everything there speaks to the true, the deeply felt belief that my students are writers, and I just need to get out of their way and give them the tools so that they can thrive. And on the next slide, I want to show you some of their classrooms. And so this is a map that Mrs. Alexander drew of her classroom. And you can see that the way that she's designed the space for flow of ideas, flow of bodies, and the flow of stories, and this dialogue so the students can learn from each other. And you see that she has her carpet that they call their living room, and the way the desks are set up so that they can all see each other when they're working and having conversations. And then you can see her rolling chair there and how she can roll in and out of their living room space and confer with her students, have conferences with them. And then, you know, a lot around the room, there's different artifacts to inspire writing. There's plants, there's, you know, classroom pets, different artifacts that, you know, students can pick up and be inspired. And what she has to say about her classroom is that what we do each day centers around this notion of discovery. So Miss Alexander views writing and being with her students as discovery, discussion, and play. And she sees it as her job to create the classroom ecology that will continue to fuel the good work that fosters mindful literate expression. So this is a map that she drew of her classroom. And then on the next slide, similarly, Miss Bustos also created a map of her classroom. And you can see the ways that she also has her tables so that students can engage in conversations and oral storytelling. You see the rugs around the room for when they come to the carpet for mini lessons to confer. You see the teacher-made storage areas, the teacher-made bookshelves. In Christina's room, in Miss Bustos' classroom, there is wall-to-wall books stacked up because she believes that writers, to be a better writer, you need to be reading widely and to be having examples of, you know, different mentors in the classroom, as well as student-created books and mentor text and anchor charts all around the classroom space. Very colorful as well. And so this is how her students come together to live and learn and engage in intentional writing every single day. And so in this chapter, we learn about how they set that space up and for what purposes.
So one of the comments that apparently was in the chat that just flashed while you were speaking is that the maps will be used in the classroom.
Mm-hmm.
This map is gorgeous, Lisa, and definitely one I will share with my pre-service teachers. It is something pre-service teachers really need to know, that it's okay to reorganize and reorganize. But I also emphasize regarding multilingual learning is that on the walls, there need to be more examples than just English in the classroom, that we all come, our world is changing into a multilingual world. And honoring it in the classroom creates a sense of belonging that can be also representative of outside of the classroom. So the mapping is an activity I've loved to use for many years as well. And Lisa, I think it will work very well in your classroom.
Mm-hmm.
Mrs. Ortiz and Mrs. Springer are just such innovative teachers. They love to use units of study. They have text sets for their units of study. They have lots of writing, sometimes fiction, sometimes nonfiction, depending on the purposes of the writing for that day or that week. Mrs. Ortiz uses a unit, Miss, right? Spanglish, mis raíces, my roots. This is a second grade unit where students read and notice content features of mentor texts about heroes. So it's going to be mostly biography based, the types of articles that are provided or the books that are provided. But they move then to express their own memories, experiences, inquiries, and events. In other words, there are heroes, everyday heroes in our lives.
Mhm.
So while we start with a biography, we can move into an autobiography, which is done even at a very early age, so that what we learn in school, we recognize in our own families and in our own communities. So that's been a very successful unit for her. Mrs. Sanders Springer, she has a unit that she calls upstanders. First, they talk about what a bystander is when they see something challenging but do not speak out. And she wants to them to learn, usually again with biographies of upstanders. And they don't have to be necessarily of their own ethnic or heritage
Mhm.
group. We need to know about Ruby Bridges and why she's important in the civil rights history of our country, Sylvia Mendez and why she's important in the civil rights challenges in our country, and others who have been fighting in the past and in the present. And that may be because she has experienced
Mhm.
that civil war in her own life when her family left El Salvador. And she creates problem posing
Mhm.
situations in a book, a little booklet that she has for every mentor text that she uses. Um, and problem posing because her own approach in El Salvador to K-12 learning had been the Freirean approach of problem posing, identifying it, reflecting on it, and then doing something about it. So the kids get used to discussing and writing about what we would call critical encounters with social issues, which are things like the deportation of relatives, homelessness in the community, particularly visible in urban settings, speaking up to bullies both on and off campus, and to have better signage around the school so that they would be reminded for recycling. So, from the ordinary to the extraordinary, both of these teachers want the bilingual community of writers in their classrooms to notice and to think of resolutions of social issues that can be identified.
And then in one of the final chapters of the book, we highlight Miss Soledad Bautista and Miss Carmela Valdez, both in Central Texas at different schools within the same district, teaching in dual language and bilingual classrooms. At the time, Soledad, Miss Bautista, was teaching fourth grade, and Miss Carmela Valdez was teaching first grade, and now she's teaching, I believe, pre-K. She just moved into pre-K, I believe. And this chapter, we really focus in the ways that the teachers lean in, listen, and learn alongside their students. And they see their students as writers, as all these teachers do. And they really set up time and space every day for their writers to thrive and to grow from where they're at. And in their classrooms, they use daily conferring. They have daily conferences with their students. And Ms. Bautista says that this creates a bond between teacher and student that erases the roles of teacher and student. So each not just the teacher is teaching, but the student is teaching. And then the teacher becomes a student, and it's this reciprocal teaching and learning happening within that conferring space. And within that space, there's Carmela talks about this is the space where these breakthroughs happen, where students can name the gems in their writing and teachers help them name their gems and help them see the power that they are, the great things that they're already doing, the smart things they're doing in their writing. And then these teachers help them to lift that writing even greater heights. And so this takes time, this takes planning, and this takes a teacher to really believe that their students know what they need as writers, but they also provide that space to teach them the skills and strategies that writers draw upon to create books, to create advocacy projects. And so in these classrooms, both teachers, through conferring, um, help students find topics that they're interested in, help them to find the resources to take that topic through the writing process, individualized text for them, different modes of to write, different translating practices, and really meeting the writers where they're at. And that happens through that one-on-one daily conversation and through the teacher making those minute-to-minute teaching moves and really moving with the writer as they are, you know, talking about their writing and sharing where they're at in a project. And so in these classrooms, just like you're seeing these threads throughout the chapters. They use culturally relevant mentor texts, and Carmela specifically used them to teach journey stories. Her students came, from all over Mexico and South America, and they all had different kinds of journey stories. And she didn't even specifically have them think about, immigration stories, but also journeys to other states, to other schools, to visit. There's lots of journeys that we take on our lives. And so she helped them to write their journey stories. And then each of these teachers really teaches to the strengths and resources of each writer. And that happens when we are seated alongside them, listening to them share their writing and helping them find the strategies to move that writing forward. And in their daily writing, those conferences, they're naming the strengths and they're helping them to recognize that as a strength and as part of their writer's toolkit that they can draw on across writing, not just in this one instance, but this is a tool that you can draw on as you're writing across different projects and different subjects for different purposes. And then the teacher in these spaces is a model for writing and living a writerly life. So we hear a lot about lead learners. They're the lead writers in that class. They model what it means to listen to someone's story. They model what it means to make yourself vulnerable and share something that maybe you haven't shared before, but you feel safe because you're around, your family of writers, a community of writers, people who understand you and who will embrace you. They model these practices for their students and alongside their students. So they're living the life of a writer alongside their students. And then they're also supporting their writers and making their writing public. So the writing that happens in the classroom isn't for a grade or for the teacher. It is for the community. It is for parents to come in and visit and, see the writing that's being composed. It's for the school community to come together to engage in these author sharing parties and big potluck celebrations where the writer is celebrating and the writing and the journey that they took to get that piece to that final published product. And Miss Bautista's work in this chapter, the portrait that we've written about her, that we wrote about her, that we really highlight the work that she's doing, describes a social justice writing unit where each kid wrote on a different topic that was important to them. Social justice issues, culture, identities, immigration, LGBTQIA concerns, and awareness. And she helped them take it to the writing process. And as a grade level, they did this in the entire grade level. And then they turned their cafeteria into a cafe to share their writing. And it was a beautiful celebration for the students, for the families to see the work that their children were doing, and for all the voices to be celebrated. And so in this last chapter, before the conclusion, we really learn about the importance of leaning in, listening, and learning by pulling up that seat alongside your students and following them as they make that first move as writers.
So in these spaces that we've described, young writers cultivate a sense of belonging, of listening, of sharing, and of learning. They develop confianza. They're very confident to name and share deep feelings. So here's an example of an essay, just part of it. Yo soy Jennifer. Mi vida jamás será la misma a la de México porque no tengo familia aquí. No se siente lo mismo el tener a toda tu familia en otro lugar que tenerlos a tu lado todo el tiempo. Yo extraño mucho las sonrisas, los abrazos, la comida y todas las tradiciones que teníamos juntos en familia. I am Jennifer. My life here will not be the same as it was in Mexico because I do not have family here. That's a lot to share.
Mhm.
It doesn't feel the same having all of your family somewhere else than having them by your side all the time. I miss the smiles so much, the hugs, the food, and all the family traditions we had together. So Jennifer is trying to develop new traditions in a new country, but still with that loneliness for the family that she may not see reunited with her for quite a while. And to be able to share that deep feelings openly creates a very particular kind of community, a compassionate community. So we're very happy with the writings that these best practices can produce.
Mhm.
So I think Tracy will now share a little bit about Virginia, who you heard about in the beginning.
And before we do talk about Virginia, we wanted to talk about threads throughout the book. And as we were chatting and sharing these snippets of these portraits, there's lots of threads and there's lots of themes that are overlapping as well. And so in these classrooms, we notice these practices that teachers are embodying, that teachers model storytelling. They share their lives with their students. They model storytelling as an important way to share your story as a resource in the classroom across, not just in writing, but across the school day. And they're always using storytelling in many different ways. And then also in these classrooms, as they're cultivating and writer stories and voices, they are using culturally relevant mentor texts in the writing instruction, and not just, picking something off the shelf and reading it. They have intentional reasons for picking these texts. They are thinking about the student who is trying to make new traditions here in a new country and thinking about that text just for them. So they have individual mentor texts that they use for specific writers that they bring into conferences. And then they also have the mentor text to teach a genre, to teach a specific strategy to the entire classroom. Looking at, but this happens by knowing the students and knowing their stories and knowing what's important to them. So it's very intentional and it's very in the moment as well. And then in these classrooms, teachers writing and dialogue with students serves as a model and makes the writing process visible to young writers. So in these classrooms, teachers are really modeling their thought processes. So many times, and I'm saying even from my own personal experience, you're teaching and you're doing things, and then you go, okay, go ahead and go. And they try, but then they don't get it. And it's like, well, what did I do? And so the teachers make visible that thought process about why they're making the moves that they're making as writers. So I put these words down because I wanted to convey this emotion, or I started with a capital because of this, or I have dialogue here because of this, or I wrote in Spanish because of this. So they're really making visible their processes so that students can internalize that and in turn try it in their practices. And so that's something that me at the university, I'm always working on modeling for my students because they're going to go into their classrooms and do that the same, but also for my young writers as well. So making visible, everything is very intentional. The dialogue they use, the word choice, so that their students can take up these practices, take up these strategies, and come back to them again and again.
Yes, and as you have seen from the examples that we've provided today, that young writers really enjoy writing about their families and their family experiences, that they inquire deeply, not only about social problems in society, but deeply about their own feelings when they are transitioning, for instance, from one city to another city, from one nation to another nation. They do want authentically to discuss what they hear around them, what they hear in the news, and what they don't completely understand. And in having young writers feel safe to explore, to bring up feelings, they also thrive as a community of writers that isn't only about technique or technical skills. It's really about bringing your identities, valuing the diversity of experiences that might be in the community, which is another way to learn that we're not stereotypical, that
Mhm.
everybody is unique. Um, and the power of the words they use and which language they use, and to be respected enough that you can share it and it can be done inside the classroom, gives the courage to be able to do it outside the classroom, where that is not always the view of folks in the wider community.
Mhm.
So in these settings, we feel like the courage that it needs
Yes.
to be a writer that can express deeply who you are and be accepted is an exceptional experience of a community of writers. And once you have that, you can help create that in other classrooms. And so we're very um, enthusiastic about the
Mhm.
reception to um, the 6 teachers who have helped us frame best practices and professional practices for cultivating young writers.
And Maria, it's been such a joy learning from them and working on this project with them during the pandemic. It brought me so much peace and joy to get back into their classrooms virtually with them and to just have some time to hear how they were doing. And I really wanted to just make sure I said that. And so if they're listening, they know how much of a joy it was and how much it's not lost on us, the time it takes to, open your life up and the vulnerability as
Yes.
well, and how this work will live on for many, many years to come. And so we wanted to bring back Virginia's words from the very beginning. We started with her poem about her Mexican identity. And she writes in the conclusion of her piece, I wrote this piece because I believe that it's my duty as a Mexican American to change my people's minds about Mexicans and stereotypes people say about them, because I believe that everyone is equal and everyone should be respected. And so in her words, we see her naming herself, defining herself, and pushing society to recognize the beauty of her culture, of her heritage, and of all the parts that make her who she is. And she believes, and she's doing it, that her writing can change minds, can offer a new narrative to the existing narratives in the world. And this type of writing is possible in our classrooms when we believe that our students have important things to say, that we believe that our students' stories matter, that their voices matter. And when we create those intentional spaces with our students to recognize the power of their experiences and the power of their writing, composing, and art to change the world. And we see that here throughout this entire book.
So the last piece of student writing that we wanted to share with you, as I mentioned before, is that students develop confianza, the confidence to share their writing. But this one is expressing it, like we were talking
Mm-hmm.
before, in the illustration, in the words and the illustration in second grade. This young man wrote, Mi orgullo, my pride. Soy un luchador en el ring de la vida. Mis raíces, mi familia, mi maestra, Mrs. Ortiz, me dan el superpower para alcanzar las estrellas. Sí se puede. I am a fighter in the ring of life. My roots, my family, my teacher, Mrs. Ortiz, give me the superpower to reach the stars. Yes, you can. It's just such a
Mm-hmm.
beautiful way in a small child in the early grades to have the confidence to use the symbols of his culture, to put a mask because he likes luchadores. For him, it's that fighting for life, that yes, you can. He puts his mask on, it gives him powers. El Rayo Flash, he gives himself a name. He puts on his cape, then CH, which is the name that his family gives him. So he has more than one way to identify. It's just symbolically there. The words are there. It's a beautiful statement of what it was like to live in the classroom of a teacher who valued language, his heritage, and allowed it to be represented in art and not just in words. So we wanted to just end with him, because there's nothing better in life than to be proud of who you are, and where you come from.
And to have a teacher that helps you to recognize your superpowers.
Yes.
And he states it right there.
Yes. We need that at every stage of life.
We do. Right? And that's who you are for me, Maria.
So at this point, we wanted to know about your questions. What important takeaways do you have for us? What are your lingering questions about these shared portraits and these student writings? You can drop them in the chat and we can consider them together.
And also, I'm always happy to hear from you after at NCTE.
Yes.
On social media. And it'd be really great if you are at NCTE to come up and say hello and to have a conversation about the good work that you're doing in your classroom.
Emily Skiff, thank you. How much time do you believe is necessary for a daily writing classroom routine for best practice? Ooh, that's a biggie.
Yeah, that's a great question, because I know there's only so much time in the day. And many times writing kind of takes a backseat to other subjects. That is a really great question. What do you think, Maria?
Well, one of the things that I've observed in classrooms, and it depends really on the grade level and what has been studied, but one of the things that I've seen is that not all kids are doing the same thing. In other words, a teacher might be conferencing with someone's second draft while another one is starting a new project. So part of it is, it's regulated in certain places.
Yeah.
It's regulated 90 minutes. And if it's regulated, again, not all the activities that the students participate in are at the same pace. If it's less than that, I don't think it's much less than that anymore until you get out of the elementary grades.
Yeah.
In early childhood, that is very difficult to sustain.
Yeah.
Unless you're integrating your curriculum to a degree that you know how much time you're spending in language arts. The kids don't. Because later on we learned that, kids learn that there's time management. But in the beginning, school is when it's fun and it's learning from each other. There doesn't have to be the break between disciplines that sometimes is regulated in the upper grades.
And I think one of the most important things too, from my personal experiences and from my observations, is having the students write every single day. 15, 30 minutes, whatever you can get in, and, teaching them, modeling for them, because that is gonna, and writing about like their personal stories, writing different genres, because answering questions to a text is very different than, teaching the skills of writing, writing as a content area. So just however you can make it happen for your students,
Yes.
and if you can make it consistent, I think that is one of the best things that you can do for your students, for your writers. Thank you for your question.
Thank you.
Any other questions or thoughts? Okay. I think that this might be a good time to wrap everything up, and just thank you so much for joining us this evening, or whenever you're going to be watching this, for spending time with us, and for letting us share our book with you. And it was such a joy to write, and that we're so excited it's going to finally be out in the world.
I really honor the time that you have spent with us. It's been really wonderful for me. It's a pleasure to know that you are interested in honoring the diverse languages, histories, and experience of Latinx kids and their teachers. And Tracy had said, if you're ever interested in having people, study your classroom and your best practices, research should be about what works. We know enough about, and unfortunately hear enough about what doesn't work, but NCTE really is invested in what works and sharing it just the same way as children who have the courage to share their work with each other. It will make a difference in the kind of world we create in the future.
Thank you so much for being here today, and we look forward to hopefully seeing you at NCTE and hearing about the great things that you're doing. Have a really great night and day.
Un millón de gracias.
Adios.
Adios.
Bye.